if I could get your attention, we're gonna start with strategy session number 6, and as I mentioned in the last session, this is Let Freedom Ring: Overcoming the Political and Legal Challenges to Choice. And we're very delighted to have the panel members with us today. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Robinson. Mm-hmm. He is the president of the Black Alliance for Educational Options, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. If you will, join me in welcoming these gentlemen.
Good morning. It is an honor to serve as today's moderator for a panel where we're going to talk about letting freedom ring as it relates to the public and the private school choice movement. At Bayo, in the theme of yesterday's presentation by Governor Jeb Bush, we represent the chocolate milk in this movement. And no matter what milk carton you grab at any grocery store in America, someone who's going to grab it's a parent. Someone who's going to grab it's a taxpayer. And somewhere down the line, this is ultimately a movement driven by parents and their demands on lawmakers to make educational change real for their families. And so what we have assembled today are 3 experts who are doing some groundbreaking work in the field of public and private school options. And they will talk to you about the political and the legal challenges that they face, as well as some of the successes that we've actually had. School choice may be for many a intellectual issue, but for those who actually have to live with the day-to-day consequences of public policy, it's a real factor. Many of our opponents are well organized, often to the point of using rhetoric over reason to tell people why choice does not matter, and we find that to be different. We have a pretty broad public and private school choice movement in America. Over 171,000 students are participating in private programs, from means-tested vouchers to general vouchers to foster care programs and tax credits, and we're going to have someone speak on that subject. We also have those who focus on charter schools, which is also a very growing segment right now in America, and one that parents want. The order that you see up here right now is the order of that you're actually going to be first one to go forward. We have here Attorney Tim Keller from the Institute for Justice. He is the executive director of the Arizona branch. I was sharing with him that IJ, back in the early 90s, made a very strong impact on the work and my interest in school choice when a young attorney named Clint Bolick came to South Central Los Angeles in the early 90s to talk to parents about school choice, and it was some of the early readings that made a point in a choice there. He's going to talk about the role of fighting for choice in courts, and he's got great experience there. It's going to be followed by Dr. Adam Schaeffer, who is at the Cato Institute. Dr. Schaeffer is a great researcher. He's able to take some of the arcane data and make it user-friendly so that we can actually debate this in the intellectual realm as well. He'll talk about the vouchers, tax credits, some of the challenges that we've had there, as well as some of the strategies we need to look at. The last speaker is going to be Dr. John Chubb, who is the senior executive, president and founder of Edison Learning. He's going to talk about school reform, but he's going to bring in to focus public charter schools. They are part of the larger parental choice movement, and he will share some issues there. All of them will speak. I will ask one general question, and after completion of that, we're going to open it up for a very lively discussion about letting freedom ring. So I will turn it over to the attorney.
There we go. Since 1991, there's not been a single day that the Institute for Justice has not been in court somewhere in the United States defending school choice. Of course, after a decade of litigation, our work led us to the steps of the United States Supreme Court, and in a case called Zellman v. Simmons-Harris, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Cleveland's school voucher program, which allowed parents to choose any private school of their choice, whether it be religious or non-religious, and the court upheld the program. But as we all know, that didn't end the legal battles. As my friend and mentor and former colleague Clint Bolick liked to say, anytime that the rebels strike a blow for freedom, the empire is always there to strike back. And so the voucher wars continue. Robert Shannon, who was then the lead counsel for the NEA, promised after the Zellman victory that the unions would continue to challenge voucher programs and other school choice programs in state court utilizing state constitutional provisions. In fact, he was quoted as saying that they would utilize lofty principles such as separation of church and state, but that they would not refrain from also invoking what he called Mickey Mouse procedural tactics in order to stop school choice as well. Out in Arizona, we've seen quite a bit of litigation. In fact, all of our school choice programs to date have been challenged in one way, shape, or form. The most recent case was entitled Kane versus Horn. This was a challenge to Arizona's two school voucher programs. In 2006, Democratic Governor Janet Napolitano signed two programs, one for children with disabilities and one for children who had been in the foster care system. And they were up and running for about 2 years. As soon as they went into effect, the Arizona Education Association filed suit challenging them under Arizona's two state Blaine amendments. Blaine amendments, generally speaking, their history is rooted in racial or religious discrimination and animosity. Their genesis was a movement targeted at preventing funding, state funding for Catholic schools. And we know, based on the history of the Blaine amendments, their purpose is to prevent direct appropriations from the state to private Catholic schools. And in fact, most of Blaine amendments use the word sectarian schools, and sectarian at the time was code for Catholic, not what at one time was a very predominantly Protestant public education system. So the unions invoked this amendment. We argued vigorously in court that they do not, in fact, prohibit, Blaine amendments do not prohibit programs that appropriate funds to parents to help parents choose the school of their choice. Indeed, all of the history of the Blaine amendments demonstrates that there was no intent to prevent the sort of incidental, indirect aid to private schools of the sort that vouchers constitute. Unfortunately, the Arizona Supreme Court disagreed with our arguments and struck down the programs in March of this year. But they didn't address some of the real issues that are out there in Arizona. For example, public schools routinely place children with disabilities in private schools when they're unable to provide them an appropriate education and pay for the full amount of tuition. And of course, the public schools in the case argued, well, when we do it, it's not aid to the private schools. It's basically a procurement. We're just buying services from these private schools. And our response was that's exactly what happens with the parents. This is an appropriation to the parents. It might be a grant in aid to the parents, but it's certainly not aid to the schools when the parent turns around and buys educational services for their children. Basically, we said that, for example, when there are state welfare programs, food stamp programs are no more in aid of grocery stores than vouchers were in aid of private schools. Unfortunately, the court ignored those arguments, didn't even address it in its written opinion, and just struck down the programs in a very short opinion that really ignored a lot of the legal implications of the decision that are now out there. However, we still have two current cases that are out there. Number one is Wynn v. Garriott. This is a federal court challenge under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution to Arizona's individual tuition tax credit program. The unions first challenged the individual program in state court. The Arizona Supreme Court rejected those challenges to the tax credit program and said tax credits are not public funds. There's no appropriation involved, so our state Blaine amendments, therefore, are not at play. So they turned around and in 2000 filed this federal court challenge to the tax credit program. Of course, 2 years later, the Zellman case came down. The Arizona District Court dismissed this challenge, and quite a number of years later, we finally had an oral argument in the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit reversed the dismissal of the challenge to the tax credit program and said, while tax credits generally are constitutional, there may be a problem with the way Arizona's STOs operate. They had a very unbelievably twisted logic. The court basically said because taxpayers have a private choice as to where they want to direct their tax dollars to which STO, and some STOs, and STOs are school tuition organizations, limit their scholarships based on particular, some of them limit their scholarships based on a religious affiliation. Some of them limit based on geography. There are scholarship organizations that only fund private schools in Yuma, Arizona, or Flagstaff, Arizona. Some of them limit their scholarships based on pedagogy. For example, there are Montessori schools, Montessori STOs. They said, but because some of them limit their scholarships based on religion, and taxpayers may direct those funds primarily to religion, well, then the taxpayers actually don't have choice. These programs don't expand choice. Therefore, they might be unconstitutional. It's extremely twisted logic. I don't think it'll be upheld ultimately. But if it was, if the decision ultimately stands, and again, I don't think it will, because in Zellman, the court said 2 tests. Number 1, do the programs coerce parents to choose religion? There's no coercion here. Number 2, is it based on private choice? The Ninth Circuit admitted that it was based on private choice. And then is the program neutral? In other words, does the program itself encourage religion over non-religion or one religion over another? And it doesn't violate any of those tests. But if it did stand, the program would continue. The STOs would have to change the way they operate, although if they had to change the way they operate, quite frankly, I think it would really harm the Arizona program. I think that the ability of STOs to go out and raise money from particular communities, like-minded individuals, is one of the real strengths of the program, and has resulted in a lot more money coming into the program, a lot more scholarships for kids, and a lot more parental choice. We also have a current challenge to Arizona's corporate tax credit program. This is Green versus Garriott. This is the union's attempt to reverse the Arizona Supreme Court's prior decision upholding the individual tax credit program. To date, they've lost every single round. They recently appealed their loss in the Arizona Court of Appeals to the state Supreme Court. And at this point, I'm not sure what... let's see if we can get rid of that. There we go. And the Arizona Supreme Court has not yet decided whether or not it will accept review of this case. My expectation is that it will decline review of the case because in the recent decision striking down the voucher programs, the Arizona Court of Appeals specifically relied on, the Arizona Supreme Court specifically relied on the Cotterman decision, said it was still good law, and basically gave us a roadmap as to how to create a program that might help children with disabilities and children in foster care. So I don't think they're going to accept review. But if they did, it would be a big deal because the issue in the case would be whether or not the Arizona Supreme Court's decision in Cotterman is still good law. We also have some political obstacles we have to overcome. There have been a recent spate of news articles in Arizona supposedly investigating Arizona's private school tax credit program. I don't know. Has anybody seen these articles or heard of these articles? Just curious. Raise your hand if you have. Okay. Don't believe what you read. They're not just, it's not just hyperbole, it's not just exaggeration. Most of the supposed facts that they're reporting are just flat out wrong. They are lies. And I don't hesitate to use that word. That's a strong word. But they basically said, look, according to our investigation, what we found is that there are very few new students attending private schools. All of the funds are going to what they term the wealthy, and that there have been supposed abuses by STO directors in terms of salaries and other benefits. But none of this, they don't back any of this up with any sort of actual data. For example, all of their allegations with regard to the abuse of the program on the parent side is nothing but 4 parents who have said, yes, we might be able to afford private schools without tuition assistance. 4 parents. That's all they cited. That's all they gave us. But in the articles, they also said, well, we're also willing to admit that there are a handful of school tuition organizations that are doing things, quote unquote, the right way. These are organizations that give scholarships primarily based on financial need. And they said, of these 7, here's 3 of the 7. They named 3. They didn't tell us who, in their opinion, the other 4 are. Those 3 provide half of the scholarships in Arizona. We had 28,000 scholarships. 14,000 of them are coming from these organizations alone. And according to the East Valley Tribune's own numbers, they're doing it right. But here's what they also didn't tell you, is that many of the other STOs, even though income may not be their primary or number one criteria for awarding scholarships, they take that into account when they're determining who to grant scholarships to. And so it's a very lopsided coverage of the issues. Unfortunately, the coverage has been so negative and so sustained, and they've completely ignored all of the good that's being done. There are going to have to be some measure of reform in Arizona. And our Speaker of the House recently created a House committee to review the program and prepare a report. That committee is going to have its first meeting this Wednesday. I think the most important reforms are additional transparency measures. We need to collect more data from the STOs and make that data available to the public and the papers. And because once we do that, we'll be able to demonstrate that these programs are in fact helping some of the neediest students in Arizona. So as that progress moves forward, I'm confident that our side will prevail, and we'll be able to demonstrate clearly that a lot of families who otherwise couldn't afford private schools are being helped to attend private schools that are working for them. We also need to work harder at capturing the terms of the debate. In other words, we don't only need to litigate in courts, but we need to be out there litigating, quote unquote, in the court of public opinion. And we haven't always done a good job of telling all of the parent stories. We have 28,000 scholarships being issued under the individual tax credit program alone. That doesn't include our corporate tax credit program. Those are 28,000 stories that need to be told. When we were in the course of the litigation, my client Andrea Weck and her daughter Lexi really became the face of the school choice movement, and they did a terrific job of explaining, what school choice is. That it's the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to education, that there's nobody better suited to decide where a child's educational placement should be than that child's parents, regardless of whether it's a public, a private, a charter, or a homeschool. It made it clear that school choice is about all of those options, not just about private school choice. And so right now, Institute for Justice, the Goldwater Institute, and a number of other organizations are working to identify, train, and deploy many more Andrea Wecks so that we can get these stories told. We also need to engage the grassroots. We need to rally for school choice. Arizona has done a great job of bringing a lot of school choice folks together at a school choice rally every year. But we haven't done a good job of is actually connecting those students with their legislator. In other words, we need to do a better job of organizing down to the legislative district level so that when we do bring parents down to the Capitol, they're not just saying thank you to the legislature as a whole, but they can actually connect with their legislator, tell their legislator their story, and really make sure that we can solidify support for school choice on both sides of the aisle. In this regard, I think Florida has done a terrific job of doing that and organizing themselves down to that level, so we need to emulate that model across the country and in Arizona. The other thing is we need to press ahead no matter what. We have had some setbacks in Arizona with the loss of the voucher programs. The Wynn decision from the Ninth Circuit has a lot of harsh language in it, although it has little legal effect at this time. But what I'm really proud of is that through all of this, all of Arizona's school choice allies have come together, remained strong, vibrant, and really pushed to make all of our programs not only better, but more robust, to grow school choice. And in this regard, IJ and a number of organizations decided we were going to strike back after the loss of the voucher programs. And for those Star Wars junkies out there, I apologize. I realize that this is heresy to mix the old and new Star Wars, but really, we had to find somebody like Mace Windu to put my head on, right? But the result, and it wasn't just IJ, obviously it was folks like the Goldwater Institute, it was the Center for Arizona Policy. We had wonderful support from the legislature and leadership. Representative Steve Yarborough is here. He was right there in the mix, helping us. What we did is we created a new tax credit program for the children with disabilities, a new corporate tax credit program. It's called Lexi's Law, after little Lexi Weck, who was the face of the case defending the school voucher program. And we did this in the midst of a terrible budget crisis in a one-day special session. And then we had a special signing ceremony. You can see Lexi up there in her mom's arms. And so it was a really great victory for school choice. And so even in the midst of a difficult legal environment, a difficult budget environment, we were able to press ahead and score a big victory for school choice. So basically, last point, and I'll do this quickly. As you're looking to create new legislation, contact IJ. My colleague Dick Comer works full-time on school choice issues. He and I work together quite frequently. But contact IJ. Let us review your legislation. Let us review the case law in your state, and we will help you do everything we can to bulletproof legislation. We actually have a short manual called Bulletproofing School Choice Programs. Take a look at that. The Institute for Justice, along with ALEC, co-authored a 50-state survey, which gives just sort of an initial impression of whether your state is viable for a voucher program or tax credit or both. The good news is that almost every single state is a great place for one of the two programs, so take a look at that. And then remain optimistic, because I really do think that even in the midst of some difficult litigation and some difficult political environments, that the future for school choice in Arizona and across the country is very, very bright. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And from the Star Wars picture, you can see that IG actually has a sense of humor. People think libertarians do not. But that's a good thing. Well, that's a good lead-in to Dr. Schaeffer, who actually has a handout that many of you should have in front of you, and he's going to talk about his research.
Most of you should have two handouts, the one he held up and a policy analysis that goes over a lot of the details that I'll kind of rush through on model tax legislation and the reasons that I think some ways to go with legislation are better than others, and also hits one of the big points I'm going to make in a second here, which is that I think tax credits are the better way to go legislatively in every state, as far as I can tell. And the big reason for that is the legal issue. But there's been a lot of hand-wringing, I think, recently over private school choice. Is it viable? Are vouchers viable? Is private school choice viable? And I think it's important to distinguish legislatively between education tax credits and vouchers. Vouchers have taken a lot of legal hits, and it's unfortunate, and some of the rulings are preposterous and some are just unfair. The Florida decision was preposterous, but the fact is they've taken a lot of hits recently while tax credits have been expanding and resisting lawsuits across the country. The big thing I want to focus on right now, though, is the bipartisanship behind education tax credits. My favorite example, this will probably go over well here, is Florida. In 2001, when they passed the education tax credit law, it was a partisan issue. One Democrat came over and voted for it. In the past year, they expanded the law significantly and got a third of House Democrats to support the legislation, half the Black Caucus, the entire Hispanic caucus. This year, they expanded the revenue base for it and got a third of the Senate Democrats, half of the House Democrats, and 43% of all Democrats voting. So that's a huge movement in just about 8 years, and I think it's very instructive. And Florida's not alone. Rhode Island passed education tax credit legislation with a Democratic-controlled legislature. Iowa raised their tax credit dollar cap by 50% with a Democrat-dominated legislature. Pennsylvania, Arizona, Iowa all expanded or introduced new legislation that was signed by Democratic governors. So there's a real difference in the bipartisan support. And I think one of the reasons for that is the underlying legal issue. As Tim mentioned, there's a major distinction between tax credits and vouchers. Vouchers are considered government funds. Tax credits are considered a waiving of a tax obligation. They're private funds. So state constitutional language usually doesn't come into the equation when they're being reviewed. The Blaine amendments, compelled support amendments don't apply to private funds. They only apply to government funds. The Arizona, Florida, and Colorado cases all hinged on that fact. In Florida and Colorado, in fact, the Blaine Amendment and compelled support clauses didn't come into play at all. They identified uniformity clause in Florida and in Colorado, local control. in each of those cases, they could have made some sort of case to overthrow tax credits, but it would have been much more difficult, and they would have had to find some other precedent to rely on. I think that's the biggest issue, and if you want a bulletproof legislation, I think the best way to do it is to go with education tax credits right off the bat. The second issue, they're more popular, and the remaining state where vouchers faced a setback recently that I haven't talked about is Utah. Utah, the legislature passed a voucher law, and it was overturned in a ballot initiative. Now, in 2001, 2002, tax credits were being talked about, vouchers were being talked about. The polling showed about 40% support for vouchers back then and about 50% support for tax credits. Fast forward to the ballot initiative, they ended up with about 40% support. They held the line on a ballot initiative vote, which is a tremendous accomplishment. Usually the floor drops out of support facing that kind of concerted attack. But the fact of the matter is they had a fighting chance with tax credits, and with vouchers, they were facing a 10% deficit to make up in the court of public opinion. Governor Huntsman also hid under a rock during that battle. He was looking at those poll numbers, you can be sure, thinking, can I move this 10 points, and do I want to even try? 50%, you're within shooting distance. I don't know that he would have come out explicitly and engaged in the battle more than he did in the voucher case, but it would have been an opportunity there. The other issue is the coalitional aspect of it. Homeschoolers, very motivated, very aggressive community in terms of supporting legislation that they support, very reluctant to support vouchers, and are generally supportive of tax credits. In Utah, for instance, the private school community was actually smaller than the number of homeschooling children. So when you go with a voucher program, you not only go with a program that's less supported by the general public, it leaves coalitional partners on the sideline. Tax credits also, in the case of business donation tax credits, bring in the business community in a way that vouchers simply don't. Gives them some skin in the game. And if you get the program passed, that gives a powerful constituency to you, along with the SGOs and STOs that have proven a real boon to supporting expansion and defending the programs in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, and in Florida. I'll run through some policy red lines because I know this is always a big issue. Not only what is the best policy, but politics is a practical matter, and you need to give on some things. You can't always get what you want. But I think it's really important to start big. You can always compromise, but start with the best possible legislation and make compromises where you can. I think you need to try to tap all major taxes, state and property taxes, which are really important because they're such a key component of funding. And having donation tax credits and personal use tax credits to give everyone something in this fight. You broaden your potential base of support when you do that. Hold the line at a 90% credit to really give people incentive to donate to the SGOs, and make sure the SGOs can keep at least 10% for overhead. Allow the homeschoolers to claim credits. You bring them into the fight along with that. Cap the amount that individuals can claim in terms of credits rather than overall cap on the program, which diminishes interest in the program when people run up against a cap and get turned away from year to year. And if you need to smooth the transition, phase in the program rather than limiting the program in legislation indefinitely. I think that's something that is best to try right off the bat. And finally, I'll come to selling education tax credits. And this has become even more true, I think, today than it was when I did research on what message works best with education tax credits and vouchers, is the money issue. The equity issue is the personal issue. It's the one that seems right off the bat to hit people most directly, and it does. But the question is whether it broadens your support and deepens your support. And it may seem counterintuitive that simply focusing on the financial benefits of school choice could move movement more than the human side of the story. What everyone agrees and knows is the biggest problem in education, which is the gap between rich and poor and their opportunities in education. But I have looked at the data, and the financial argument moves people, I think in part because people already expect that it will help low-income children. It will improve education. What they expect also, however, is that it will increase the cost of education tremendously. And to the extent that you can undermine that false belief and demonstrate how much education school choice has saved in other states, Florida has saved $1.50 for every dollar invested in their tax credit program, for instance. Pennsylvania is saving about $30 million per year, according to some studies, depending on the size of the program. You can save a tremendous amount. And I think in these times of fiscal constraints, that can become a very powerful argument when we're looking at cutting education budgets, ways that we can make education investment more efficient, and focusing on investing in education through private education tax credits, private investment in education, rather than cutting education to the bone. It's the biggest part of state and local budgets, about 25% of all state-derived revenue. So that's where you need to go to find savings. I think people are going to be looking for savings for years to come, and that's actually the one argument that's most powerful in moving people's opinion towards support on education tax credits in particular. So I'll leave it there and pass it along. I think we're trying to get a lot of questions in, so I look forward to that. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to be speaking to you without the benefit of PowerPoint or handout. So I'm going to begin with one of the most effective rhetorical devices, and that is cliche, because they're so memorable. So here goes. And I mean this not tongue-in-cheek. For charter schools, this summer has been the best of times and the worst of times. So there you have it, the cliche. What do I mean by that? Well, something quite remarkable has been happening for charter schools over the last 9 months. And the remarkable thing is the influence of the Obama administration. The Democratic Party has not historically been a strong supporter of charter schools. But this administration, in rhetoric and in deed, has been extraordinarily supportive. When the president speaks about what's necessary to turn around failing schools, he talks about the importance of charter schools. When the president lays out his 4 priorities, and his secretary, Arne Duncan, lays out their 4 priorities for improving American education, they talk about the urgency of turning around low-performing schools. And they talk about the 5,000 schools in America that are especially responsible for the extraordinary dropout rates from the public education system. And in doing that, they've emphasized that charter schools are critical to the solution. And in fact, one of the models for turning around failing schools that the administration has been pushing all year, all summer, has been chartering out failing public schools. In June, Secretary Duncan spoke, the first time a major Democratic leader has done so, spoke before 3,000 people in Washington, D.C. At the National Charter Schools Conference. And it was quite a remarkable moment to have a Democratic leader standing up and touting the benefits of charter schools. It was really a remarkable moment. And since then, the administration has carried forth its support for charter schools by making very explicit in its race to the top requirements that states, in order to have a successful application for race to the top funding, which is close to $5 billion, it's an extraordinary, unprecedented amount of discretionary support, that for a state to be eligible to receive those funds, to have their application even considered, that the state must remove its cap on the number of charter schools in the state if a state currently has a cap. So this is an extraordinary change change of course for Democratic leadership. The Democrats obviously are strongly supported by our nation's teachers' unions, which have been unalterably opposed to charter schools and unalterably opposed to competition and choice. But the Democratic Party leadership has recognized that charter schools serve primarily the children of the disadvantaged constituents that comprise a large portion of the Democratic electorate. So while the Democrats are cross-pressured between union opposition to charter schools on the one hand and to the cries of their constituents in the inner cities on the other hand, this administration has sided with the disadvantaged, sided with justice, and has come out forcefully in support of charter schools, and that is a great thing for charter schools. And so when I say it's the best of times for charter schools, I mean that. This is an extraordinary time politically. However, it's also been the worst of times, and that is partly, maybe even mostly, because the this Democratic administration is in fact cross-pressured. Their message to policymakers has been that charter schools are vital to the future of public education and we need more of them, but charter schools in fact have quite a mixed record of performance, and they have to look themselves in the eye and clean up their own house. And so when Arne Duncan spoke to 3,000 people in Washington, D.C. in June about the importance of charter schools, he also challenged them and said, you must hold yourself to a higher standard. You must ensure that we have really high-quality charter schools. Now, nobody in the charter school movement can object to that. We have to hold ourselves to higher standards. There can be no objection to that whatsoever. But the administration did something else. They pulled out a study that had just been released by Stanford University, which, full disclosure, I have a connection with and I respect deeply. But not everything that comes out of Stanford is to be believed. This particular study by an institute there that goes by the acronym of Credo, which I suppose is supposed to suggest credibility, but not in this case. At any rate, what this study found, and this was the headline, was that 1/3 of all charter schools in America make kids better off. 1/3 of all charter schools leave kids about the same as they would have been if they hadn't gone to the charter schools, and 1/3 of charter schools make kids worse off. So that's not exactly the kind of batting record that you want for an important school reform initiative. And then this Credo study was picked up by literally every Democratic newspaper in the country. And while they were saying, yes, we need more charter schools, we need to recognize that charter schools are really not doing any better than public schools. So that was kind of the summer for people who are, get up every morning and think about how to advance the charter school cause. On the one hand, you have the support of the administration. On the other hand, you have this, quote, research saying that the charter schools are just not measuring up. So what do we make of all this? Well, let me just address the two questions. One, what does the research say? And then second, what needs to be done to move the charter schools forward, and is the administration doing enough? First, on the research question, the Credo study, like a lot of studies of charter schools, has many quality elements to it. There is much about the Credo study that is in fact credible. But the big limitation of the Credo study, like a lot of studies of charter schools, is that it's very short term. It's much like studies of tuition tax credits. Children switch from a public school to a private school. Tests are given for a year or two, and you say, how did it work out? How did they do? Well, the fact of the matter is education, K-12 education, is a 13-year experience. It takes time to make a difference in kids' lives. We can't be drawing conclusions after a couple of years to see how kids are doing. And the Credo study, like most studies of charter schools, was very short term. It looked at 3 years of student experience. And that's an important limitation, because what Cato found, if you look beneath the surface, is that in the first year, right after kids switch from public to charter schools, there is a dip in their achievement. And this is actually well known in just about any kind of education intervention. When kids switch from one situation to another situation, there is a period of getting traction, and there's some slippage that takes place. What Cato found in years 2 and 3 was that, in fact, in years 2 and 3, the kids made more progress than they would have had they been in public school. So there was a backslide, and then there was a catching up, and it netted out to this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 verdict. Now, the press isn't interested in those kinds of details, and the administration, for their part, wanted to send this two-part message. We want charter schools, but we got to be tough on them, all right? But in fact, the research was not the basis for that. Now, happily, subsequent to the June study, a very, very important study was just released 2 weeks ago. It's by Carolyn Hoxby, who's also at Stanford. It's where all the research takes place. Hoxby's study, interestingly, has not been covered by the Democratic newspapers, which is very interesting, although it was covered by the Wall Street Journal. So what Carolyn Hoxby's study did, and I would urge any of you to see Chancellor Joel Klein here to ask him about the study as well. Carolyn Hoxby's study looked at every student in the New York City public schools who has switched from a public school or is in a charter school. And the interesting thing about New York City is that to get into a charter school, because there's so much demand for the charter schools, there's lotteries. There's too many kids that want to get into the charter schools for spots in the charter schools. So lotteries are held, and then on the basis of these lotteries, you have kids that get into the charter schools, and then you have kids who did not get into the charter schools. And what's important about that to a researcher is that those two pools of kids, the kids who didn't and did, are identical in that they all had the same motivation to want to attend charter schools. So she looked at these two pools of kids in every charter school in a very large sample throughout the entire city of New York. And this is the gold standard kind of research study on these questions. It's the best way to control all of the background factors. The other thing that she did, which was really unique, is that she followed these kids over the full school career that they were in at charter schools, and that was up to 8 years of experience in charter schools. And what she found was that the kids in the charter schools each year made more and more of a gain relative to the kids who wanted to be in charter schools but weren't. And in fact, the gains for kids who happened to be in charter schools for 8 years were so great that they nearly made up the difference between the typically low-level achievement of disadvantaged kids and the high level of achievement of kids in the neighboring school district of Scarsdale, New York. That's extraordinary. Now, this is research done the right way, with the right kinds of controls, and most important, the long time frame. And it showed the difference that charter schools can make. So the evidence is not as mixed as the administration would have it. We still have to have high standards for charter schools, but the fact of the matter is, when you take the long view, kids in charter schools are doing extremely, extremely well. Now, that is news that we all need to appreciate, need to understand, and when asked, as many of us were this summer, well, what about the Cato study? We need to understand what good research looks like and what it actually shows. Now, the second thing I want to observe about the administration's support, which I think is, as I say, is incredibly important, is that their support for eliminating the caps on the number of charter schools is an important message. It is an important message. But it also is a bit of a distraction, because caps are not the main obstacles. They're just the most visible obstacles to charter school expansion. The fact of the matter is, as my fellow panelists shared in the other areas of vouchers and tuition tax credits, there are all kinds of ways in which the effectiveness of choice can be compromised, is compromised by opponents who may not be able to put a rigid cap in place. And I'm somewhat concerned that as the administration beats the states up to eliminate their caps, which states will do to get race to the top money, that the other obstacles will be overlooked and will remain just as difficult for advocates of charter schools. And I'll just tick these off so we all are reminded of the work that's ahead. First is financial equity. At least half the states that have charter schools right now do not provide a level financial playing field. Many states will provide charter schools with state funding but not with local funding. It's extremely difficult to run an effective charter school with half of the funding of a traditional public school. Second, facilities. Even states that provide equal measures of operational funding provide no capital funding. And speaking speaking from personal experience, as someone with Edison Learning who has been responsible as an organization for opening probably roughly 100 charter schools over the last 20 years, if you don't have a facility and you have to pay for a facility out of your operating budget, which will consume 15 to 20% of that budget, you're still playing with one hand tied behind your back relative to the public schools. States must provide for either facility funding or actually provide for facilities. Now, one thing I will say about going back to Carolyn Hawksby and the study of the New York City charter schools, the New York City charter law is very good. It provides equal funding on an operating basis, and the city provides facilities for charter schools. So the charter schools actually can compete on a level playing field. Another obstacle that has to be tackled is teacher compensation. In many states, in charter schools, the charter schools must pay according to the existing teacher compensation system. That means the teacher wage structure. It also means the teacher benefit system, the teacher retirement system. That makes it very difficult to be creative with your budgeting. It makes it very difficult to do the kinds of things that Michelle Rhee talked about this morning, which is having incentive compensation or using some of the retirement compensation as current compensation to attract young people who are less concerned about joining the retirement system and so forth. That remains an important obstacle. The final obstacle that I want to mention is an obstacle that gets in the way of scaling. You know, there are organizations nationally that have done a great job replicating success. The most prominent of those is KIPP. Right? And KIPP has right now some 70 or 80 schools around the country. There are other organizations, both not-for-profit and for-profit, that are having success replicating success, so that charter schools are not each a one-off operation, but can be a group of schools that benefit from working together as part of a common organization. It's exceedingly difficult under the current charter school laws to scale success. And the reason for that is that in virtually all states, a charter school board is prohibited from supervising more than one school. So as you try to scale up, each school must have its own board, its own governing structure. There are minor exceptions to this, but this makes it so difficult to scale and replicate success. So there are other obstacles. The main point here is that, yes, it would be great to have the caps eliminated in all or most of the states, but the obstacles still remain there, and the work very much still remains to be done. So thank you very much.
You've heard from three very informed speakers who talked about the public and the private school sector work we're doing in parental options. We heard about vouchers and tax credits, the challenges that are there in the legal system, is also in the area of messaging, which is a challenge. Also in the charter school sector, great things going on, but we have to lift the cap. One question that I'd like to throw out to you before we open up to the audience: in the general parental choice movement, there seems to be a public charter school versus a tax credit and tax and a voucher debate, that we have to either have one or the other. Is there a way for us to find a political middle ground where we're not using conjunction or, but that we can have public charter schools and tax credits and vouchers and somehow find a way of making it work politically and legally? That's for anyone on the panel.
Well, I think that, well, this is on or not, the political circumstances vary from state to state. And ideas that are acceptable in one place may not be acceptable in another. I think that the basic political rule of thumb that should be followed is that you take what's given to you. So if you can get a charter school law, law passed, but you can't get the others, then you work with that. You try to improve that. If tax credits are what's most feasible, then you work that. You try to improve that. Two things happen when you get these laws passed. One is that you create constituencies for them. So 20 years ago, before there were any charter schools, the idea of charter schools was just a theoretical construct. And people would say, well, you should have choice whether you're in the city or the suburbs. Choice will be good because it'll create competition, and competition will improve the schools. But they were just theoretical arguments. Now, with 1.5 million kids in charter schools, when you have debates about charter schools, it's not theoretical. There are over 1 million parents who are kids who are being served, and their parents are now politically active, and they change the politics. The same thing for kids the kids who receive vouchers or for tax credits. So when you pass these laws, even if they're imperfect, even if they're small, they create constituents, and that helps to change the politics. And then the more of these things you have, whether they're charter schools or vouchers or tuition tax credits, the public gets the idea that education can be done differently. It's not just about attending your local neighborhood school, that there are a lot of options out there, and the more people get accustomed to that idea, the more the politics changes as well.
I'd just add, I agree with that, and creating a constituency for choice and a different model of education is a great thing that charters bring to the table. I'd say private school choice helps charters as well. It keeps the pressure on politicians and keeps the opponents of school choice distracted and fighting on two fronts, and I think helps guard against some of these restrictions that tend to creep in or that the opponents try to layer on afterwards, and really puts a lot of pressure on the public school system to keep choice open.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is creating a culture of choice, and that when we talk about school choice, we're not necessarily talking strictly about private school choice. Arizona is a great example of the fact that you don't have to have an either-or approach. Arizona has a really robust charter school law. We've got hundreds of charter schools all across the state. So some of them are the highest performing public schools in their particular district. It's something to be really proud of. I think it's something that has sparked educational reform in the public schools. They've reacted to some of the traditional charter schools, created new types of public schools. So it's been really healthy environment. And as Adam said, I think that our private school choice component has strengthened the charter school movement as well. And so Arizona is a great example of the fact that you can have robust charter schools, you can have a strong private school choice program, and really create an opportunity for parents to choose from a complete array of options when they're looking where they want to place their kids.
One consistent theme with all the speakers is that money matters, and we often know one movie which said, "Show me the money." One constituency that I've seen has been important to private and public school choice movement is show me the mothers. These are the ones who have been the greatest constituent right now for the special needs scholarship program. Been moms, same thing for charter schools, same thing for the private school movement. Here in D.C., where there's a current battle with the D.C. scholarship program, Virginia Walden Ford and IJ, Lime School Choice, and other allies have come together to make sure we show them not only mothers but children as well. So it's definitely a constituency issue, and it's going to be a political battle that we have to fight. So we've heard some good dialogue. We're now going to open it up to questions. We have a gentleman in the back who has a microphone. If you can, just please state your name and the organization you're with. Question.
Thanks. I'm Paul Anderson from the Minnesota Legislature. Question for Tim. If a lot of the opposition in Arizona to the tax credit stems from the credits going to people that maybe don't need them, is means testing a compromise or a way to address that concern, and what do you feel about that?
I don't think means testing is the solution in Arizona. For one thing, I'm real cautious with regards to means testing because it doesn't necessarily get to genuine financial need. When you take when you choose whatever financial level you're going to set the means test at, you're going to leave a lot of people out of the picture, I believe, who genuinely need school choice options. They may be facing other financial obstacles that aren't reflected by just looking strictly at an income level. Numbers of kids who may be who are in college, medical bills. There's just a whole host of other issues that you leave on the table, and so I think you're leaving a lot of people out of the picture. The other thing is I think that Arizona's programs are already serving large numbers of low-income families who otherwise couldn't afford private schools. And so I think that in Arizona, the most important aspect is really getting to those numbers and being able to demonstrate through a real transparent system to show exactly who it is that we're helping, that these aren't programs that are merely subsidizing the quote-unquote wealthy in Arizona, that they really are helping families with real needs.
Another group that has played a tremendous role in getting out the message, to follow up what you're saying about what people want, the Friedman Foundation has put out a number of constituent studies in different states that Bail has been a co-signature to, and it's provided an opportunity for lawmakers to actually have a document to say we've contacted a number of parents and taxpayers across the base, and some of that information has been very helpful for lawmakers as they're thinking about how to message and to reach their constituents. Question?
Ginger Tinney, Executive Director for Professional Employment Educators. My question is, I'm reading where the unions are starting to target the charter schools. And my question would be to all the panelists, how do you prevent that from happening, and how do you protect your charter schools, of course, from being taken over by the union, and also against eventually going to collective bargaining agreements?
I'll venture what I think is, from my perspective, the most important thing. I think that while the unions have been extremely successful in slowing the choice movement, they haven't been able to stop it. They are the most powerful group in public education, certainly, obviously, but they don't get to win all the time. And in the charter space, 40 states and the District of Columbia have passed charter legislation. Some of it's very good legislation, some of it's weaker. 4,500 charter schools have managed to develop. 1.5 million kids are in charter schools. And what's happened is, as I said a moment ago, the constituency and the constituency has changed. The politics have changed. The idea that was spread 10 or 15 years ago by opponents, that charter schools were skimming off the best kids, that they were going to serve the well-to-do and serve the middle class and so forth to the disadvantage of others. And it's just not true. Charter schools serve kids who really need them, and everybody recognizes that. And those people are now part of the political process. So when you see this administration, obviously cross-pressured between their union supporters, who would like them to draw the line and not support charters, and then the disadvantaged constituents, who obviously are an important part of the Democratic Party as well, and you see this administration really siding rhetorically and a lot of their policy with charter schools. I think it's a sign of where it's going. And each year, as charter enrollments increase, the constituency increases and the challenge for unions becomes greater. That takes time, There's no question about it. It's been 20 years to get to this point. But I just think it's inevitable, if charter schools continue to do their job and attract disadvantaged parents, that the political equation is going to shift and the unions will not get their way.
It's definitely been a mixed issue for some of the charter school organizers. Many of them said they got into this business to have more freedom at the school level, and bringing on the unions could challenge that. So there's a healthy debate going on where that's going to go. And I think with the current debate with lifting the cap, as you mentioned, I think ultimately what it's going to do ideologically is lift the crap, and we'll have a chance to have a real dialogue about it. All right. Another question over here.
State Rep from Oklahoma, Sally Kern. We have a very limited charter bill law in our state, where right now only the two major metropolitan areas, Tulsa and Oklahoma, can have charter schools. The argument is, well, we have a huge divide between rural and the big cities, so rural and urban. So what are some arguments you could give for expanding charter schools out into the rural areas?
Well, in a few minutes at lunch, you're going to hear one of the arguments, and that is that the ability to deliver education is changing rapidly through the influence of technology, and it is increasingly possible for kids to get a great education not only through face-to-face work with teachers, but through terrific experiences with both technology and teachers online. And if you look at the growth of online education in America, it has been a very substantial influence in rural areas, where rural areas have difficulty because of the limits of brick and mortar education, attracting great teachers, bringing in the ability to deliver a full high school curriculum, deliver advanced placement, so forth and so on. But it's also difficult for online education to get off the ground because the unions hate that too. I mean, that's another fact. If rural areas really want to see their kids served and want to be able to take full advantage of technology, supporting online charter schools and other vehicles for delivering online education is going to be important to that. So that's something that's coming. The other thing that I would say is if in a rural area, the demand won't support charter schools, then the public education establishment has nothing to fear. If all the advantages are with the status quo, then charter schools won't develop. So, but what's the harm in making it possible for charter schools to have a shot? If there's a critical mass for a particular interest in a rural area, it will develop. If there's not, it won't. But parents in the market will determine that. And if there's not demand and the public school system has all the advantages, then they literally have nothing to fear.
I want to follow up with Dr. Schaeffer. We had a couple of questions about charters and what that's going to mean politically. Are there any lessons the public school sector movement could learn from what you found in messaging on tax credits and vouchers?
Well, I mean, charter schools, as you pointed out, it's a disadvantage for them, but they do cost less as well. So I think that's an advantage that can be pressed in that area as well. Charter schools do more with less, and they've shown that through the studies and then just through the funding disadvantage. So I think that's a good argument to bring to the table for them.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for the questions. I want to thank the three panelists for their great presentations and look forward to more dialogue. Thank you.
I just want to remind you to fill out your evaluation forms. We're always happy to receive them. And don't forget the lunch session today is an 8-track tape deck in an iPod world. I think you'll really enjoy that presentation.